Hi again then guys, and welcome to, of course, another installment of Beards and Cars. This is for those who haven't seen an episode before, my podcast style series where we talk about bigger topics. It's not a specific car review or a tune or something like that. This is an opportunity to have more of an in-depth discussion where you can have a slightly less formal layout and really get into the meat of something, be it the best and worst, be it a countdown, be it predictions, all that kind of stuff. And this one kind of touches on that aspect of it, predictions, but not necessarily specific cars or tracks that I would predict, because we do revisit that kind of thing every so often. This is more so a generalization, because often we've talked about things in this series which have actually happened. Months and months down the line, after we spoke about them, they've happened in GT Sport. For instance, I did a video about the racing classes that we would love to see back. The thumbnail of the video was a Sauber C9, and within a couple of months we had Group C and Le Mans and the Sauber C9, and of course a couple of others returned to the game. Then we did some predictions videos featuring stuff like the Lamborghini Aventador, which literally was released in the game the same day I released that video. So we've had a lot of things come to pass that we've talked about in this series. This one is one that's already being discussed in the community, and for very good reason, because this form of racing has already had a presence in the franchise. In fact, this form of racing has had a presence in Gran Turismo since basically day one, or close enough. Gran Turismo 2 at least. I don't recall if it was in Gran Turismo 1, and I'm sure you'll put it down in the comments if it was. And that is DTM. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with DTM as a category, it's basically a form of touring car racing, and it's essentially the highest tier of touring car racing in the world. Now, some people would say that Super GT cars are kind of touring cars. I don't tend to group them in that way, because they're more like just full-on GT machines with similar performance to an early 2000s GT1 car. But at the same time, I get what people are saying, especially now that the rules are so similar, and that's something which we'll talk about later on in this video again, because it's very pertinent to the discussion. Now, the reason why I think this is a very valid discussion to have is not just because the community says we want it. Of course, we do. There are plenty of things that the community wants, but more so because this would not be a debut. We're not talking about Formula E here. We're not talking about Indy cars. This is not something that would be brand new to the franchise. DTM and touring cars in general have always been a very, very centre-forward part of the Gran Turismo series. In Gran Turismo 2, though, and I only thought of this today, I hadn't fully thought about it before, we had an entire category with like 7 or 8 cars in it in Gran Turismo 2, which is so important to the touring car scene that there were literally entire games made about it called TOCA, but it's gone. It lasted no further than Gran Turismo 2. Now, I'm sure that's partially for licensing reasons, but it was a very interesting choice and a very interesting happening that we lost all of them. And that is, of course, BTCC cars, the British Touring Car Championship. Now, some in other countries might not be familiar with this, but it's nowhere near the level of DTM, or at least not in terms of spec. In terms of competition, it's most definitely on that kind of level, because you've got cars like the Ford Mondeo, the Renault Laguna, the Vauxhall Vectra, the Vauxhall Astra, a couple of others too, which I'm just not thinking of at the moment, Peugeot 406, that kind of thing. They have around 2 to 2.5 litre engines, generally front-wheel drive, occasionally all-wheel drive like the Audi, with around 300 to 320-ish horsepower. And they tend to be fairly modestly tuned visually. They are 4-door sedans, usually with a little wing on the trunk, a chin splitter, and some fairly simple but distinctive livery. You got the green Renault, the silver Audi, the blue and white Volvo, that kind of thing. So why did that disappear? Because in Gran Turismo 2 we had, as I said, like a good 7 or 8 of them, maybe even more. Since then, do you know how many we've had? 0. That's very interesting. To go from having so many cars in a certain class to so few is a very, very strange thing. And it's not the last time that that happened, because in Gran Turismo Sport we lost Group C cars entirely, and it wasn't until they came back with the Le Mans update that we had them back. Whereas before, we had a ton of Group C cars, from Jaguar, Mazda, Mercedes, the Toyota Minolta, the Peugeot 905, a ton of those kind of vehicles, some of which were even transitional, like the Peugeot moving into that new era, the more GT1 style machines that would come later on. But it happened with DTM as well, because from Gran Turismo 2 even, we had at least 2 legendary DTM cars, the Calibra and the Alfa Romeo 155. Those remained in the franchise for a long time, and then there were others added which became arguably just as iconic, such as the Mercedes CLK touring car. What a monster that is, one of the best in the game. And of course, the Astra. The Astra is arguably the single best DTM car in the entire Gran Turismo franchise, and that wasn't the latest one that we had. The newest DTM car to ever be officially featured in the Gran Turismo series was a 2004 shape Audi A4 with the Red Bull livery. And that one, I believe, if memory serves, is closely followed by the ABT Audi TTR, which also, of course, has the Red Bull livery as well. So DTM has had a very strong and impressive showing in the franchise. However, only to a certain point, because that remained pretty much the only DTM offerings that we had right up until Gran Turismo 6. None of them ever got any newer than 2004, which is a very interesting choice to make, because in other regards, they did update the vehicles. They had newer LMPs, they had newer Super GTs, they had newer GT3 cars. But for some reason, DTM was always left out. They remained having nothing newer than 2004. That's an interesting choice, and doubtless it's to do with licensing. Now, we have none. There are no DTM cars, and in fact, barely any touring cars, really. There are just touring car style vehicles, like the Group 4 cars, for instance, have a kind of BTCC vibe to them, or even an N24 car kind of vibe, which is very similar, but no actual DTM. Now, the reason why I think this discussion is pertinent now more than ever is because of a culmination of a few things that have happened. Months and months ago, we saw Super GT return. And that was a long time ago now. That's probably at least 6 or 7 months. And that was the 3 newer Super GTs from Nissan, Lexus, and Honda. Very popular, very good, and along with them, they brought the much-awaited Group 2 category. Then, in more recent months, we had 3 more added, which were slightly older. The GTR, the SC430, and the slightly older NSX. Again, 3 very impressive cars. Also Group 2, but none of them are as fast as the newer ones, of course. That's the interesting thing. Those 3 newer ones in particular aroused people's expectations of, could we see not just those old school Astra and Calibra and Alfa 155 touring cars come back, but could that mean that we might get some new DTM style machines from companies like BMW and Mercedes, which we've never had a BMW DTM car before? Let that sink in for a second. It seems kind of weird when you think about it that way, but we never have. We've had GTs, and we had the 320i, which was the only car of its type in the game, an ETCC touring car, European Touring Car Championship, but we've never had a BMW DTM car. Of course, the M3 GTR was about as close to it as we got, and you could have some pretty good rivalry between it, but it wasn't a DTM car. Now, of course, they do. And I think the reason why it's interesting to talk about it now is because over the past few months, say the 3 or 4 months in particular, we've started to see more and more chatter, but more importantly, more and more confirmation of other new categories of car debuting on Gran Turismo Sport. We've had rumours of NASCAR. Even in the credits of the game, we've had rumours of Formula E. We've had rumours of Indy cars. And now, we already this month have the confirmation of an entire new class coming to the game. Japanese Super Formula with the Dallara SF19. So Gran Turismo Sport, no thanks, or no doubt, whatever, English, try it. No doubt because of the FIA's integration into the game, we're seeing these new categories being included. So that is why I think now more so than ever, a discussion about whether or not we could see DTM come back is more valid than it ever has been since day one on the game. And I actually think, yes, they are going to. Now, I don't necessarily think it's going to be like within the next couple of months, and I may be wrong. But I think that it is a dead certainty that DTM is going to return to Gran Turismo as a series. Now, of course, I could be wrong as far as it coming back in GT Sport. They might save it for GT7, and that wouldn't surprise me either. But with the push that they're having with Indy, with NASCAR, with Formula E, with Super Formula, they really are trying to diversify the categories of racing. Now, of course, DTM is not the only thing that we've lost. We lost Pikes Peak Specials, we lost WRC, we even lost the only V8 supercar that we ever had in the series. So there are definitely other boxes which could be ticked and that would please a lot of people. But it would be interesting as well to note, for those who don't know, that relatively recently the governing bodies of both Super GT and DTM have indeed agreed to amalgamize the rulebook. So Super GTs and DTM cars are literally more similar than they have ever been before. So in theory, not only could DTM come back, but it could literally come back in Group 2, because they are that similar to Super GT cars, and going forward, doubtless they will be even more so. Now, how cool would that be? It would in effect be a lovely throwback to the 90s era of GT300 and GT500, where you had these crazy left field choices against the Japanese cars from companies like McLaren, even Dodge with the Viper, Mercedes with the HKS liveried CLK, and a wide variety of others. Even Mosler was in there, in the GT300 category. This would be a very nice throwback, in effect, and not just a throwback in the game, but a real-world throwback as well, to those times where it was more than just the big trio from Japan. It was European cars and American cars competing as well. And what better way of including that than having the Germans come back and race against them with stuff like Opel, Audi, BMW, Mercedes, depending on how new they decide to go. So I would say, yes, I do believe that DTM is coming back. I think that the evidence points to it. There is real-world evidence of the rulebooks being amalgamated. There is in-game evidence of these new categories being added as we speak, such as Super Formula and Formula E, but also other rumoured ones like Indy and NASCAR. And I would say that, at the very least, the climate within the game is more productive to that kind of conversation than it has been in the entire history of GT Sport since day one so far. So I'm going to predict, yes, new style DTM cars are going to come to Gran Turismo. It will mark the return of DTM. I'm not going to make any predictions as to when. As I said, I could be wrong as far as it coming to GT Sport. It might be GT7, for instance. But I'm going to go so far as to say that I think, yes, there is I would say 60 to 70% chance that we will see DTM return in GT Sport. So I'm not going to say it's a dead cert, but I think there is a very, very good likelihood. So that's it for my thoughts overall. Of course, it's a discussion which could go either way. It's not like there's any concrete evidence. It's just a lot of very, very encouraging and somewhat circumstantial evidence. But evidence which nonetheless certainly merits a discussion. It's not pie-in-the-sky stuff. It's not like me saying, oh, I think we're going to get trophy trucks. Because, of course, that would be ridiculous. We've got no evidence to support something like that. On this, on the other hand, we've got quite a lot of things which could point you to at least wondering how likely it could be, if not being hopeful for it. So that's it for my thoughts. Of course, a discussion like this merits having everyone's thoughts down below. So slap your thoughts down there, have some discussions about it, and of course, I'll see you next week. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.